Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Property Pod with me, Libby, and my colleague Tanya. Today we are talking about buying a property at auction, and Tanya's here today to give us a few handy bits of information. So welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
That's great. So what are the benefits, do you think, to buying property at auction?
I would say the main benefit is probably the fast turnaround, because generally the completion date is 28 days from the date of the auction. So it's a very, very quick turnaround, and buyer can complete in that amount of time, sometimes sooner than that. And the types of properties you get at auction, there's a lot of investment and renovation opportunities. So there used to be a bit of a myth really that most properties in auction were there for a reason, and there was either repossessions or there was a problem with the property, which sometimes is the case. But generally, I'm seeing more and more sellers take up the opportunity to sell at auction, effectively to take advantage of how quickly the property can sell, and also sort of getting that many prospective buyers in the room at once. And sort of another thing buyers like is the certainty, where auction is distinct from a standard transaction is basically when the hammer falls with the traditional auction method. That's it, you're legally bound into the contract. So effectively you have exchanged contracts at that point. So there's a greater level of certainty. There's not protracted negotiations, or the risk of a buyer or seller pulling out, because once that hammer falls, that's it, you've exchanged.
There's no turning back.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And what are the benefits, do you think, to selling a property at auction?
Again, certainty. Once that hammer falls, you've exchanged. You've got a buyer that is legally bound into the contract. It's a much faster method of sale than selling sort of through the traditional method of sale, because again you have a 28-day completion generally.
Pretty fast.
But I mean, it can be varied. I've seen completion dates that were 5 days from the date of auction.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
So speedy. Yeah.
It's much faster than a standard conveyancing transaction, which can take sort of 8 to 12 weeks.
Oh, okay, great. And how fast can you get a review done on the legal pack?
Generally, we try and get them out to clients within sort of 48 to 72 hours of receipt of the legal pack and full instructions. But we will try and accommodate sort of any time scale that the client needs. Okay,
great. And how much work is involved if I were to buy through a company at auction, do you think?
It really depends on whether mortgage finance is being used, because that's where the bulk of the work is. So I would say the key thing if a buyer wants to purchase through a company is A, having that company set up, and B, making sure that the company name is noted on the contract when they're the successful bidder, because when you enter into that contract, the party entering into it is legally bound. They are the party that has exchanged, and a company is a separate legal person to an individual, even though the individual may own that company. So if, say, Mr. Smith notes his name down on the contract when buying this property, but he wants to purchase the company in his company, if he wants to purchase the property in his company, Mr. Smith Limited.
What a great name.
Imaginative, I know. He would effectively, it would be him in his personal capacity that's bound into that contract to complete, and that can only be varied with the seller's consent effectively. So they could say no, we require Mr. Smith in his personal capacity to complete, not Mr. Smith Limited. Generally sellers are quite amenable, but they are within their rights to say no. So making sure that the correct name that you wish to purchase that property in is noted on the contract is the key thing. And also if it is a newly set up company, just from a practicality point of view, making sure that company has had either a VAT number if they're VAT registered, or a UTR number issued, because a stamp duty land tax return has to be filed within 14 days of completion if the purchase price is over £40,000. And if we don't have that information, we can't then file it. So requesting that from the company's accountant at the earliest opportunity really is key.
Okay, oh great. And how long does it take to buy a property at auction?
So generally, like I said, completion will be 28 days from the date of the auction. The special conditions can include a different time frame. So check the special conditions to find out when you need to complete by. But the standard time frame is 28 days from the fall of the hammer.
Okay, brilliant. And how do I prepare my property for selling a property at auction?
So there's two aspects to it. Obviously, from the advertising point, in terms of instructing an auction house, they will obviously arrange photographs, prepare the catalogue entry. If the property doesn't have a current energy performance certificate, then they will arrange that as well, because you have to have, for most, yes, for most properties there are some exemptions. So for example, listed buildings, but unless that property is exempt, then you need a current EPC, and they're only valid for 10 years. So that's kind of from a practical point of view. From a legal perspective, then it's a case of instructing a solicitor. They will put in place a search pack, which contains, as standard, a local search, drainage search and environmental search, which will go into the legal pack. Those can take a few weeks to come back, so the earlier you can instruct those, the better. If the property is a leasehold property as well, then the earlier you can get a leasehold information pack put together from either the managing agent or the freeholder, the better, because it provides the buyer with information that they need, and having those documents missing can be off-putting to some buyers.
You want to be organised, don't you? I suppose. Yeah.
So it really is a case of, if you can put together a full comprehensive pack, your property is going to be more attractive to a large number of buyers.
Okay, great. And what is a bridging loan, and sort of what's the difference between that and a mortgage? How do you get one?
So a bridging loan is a type of short-term finance, effectively. Generally, whereas a standard mortgage will be for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, a bridging loan will be sort of 6 to 12 months. It's good for properties that don't necessarily meet the criteria of a standard mortgage. Bridging lenders tend to be more flexible, but because it is short-term finance, it does tend to be a more expensive form of finance, but the process of getting the finance arranged is, the benefit of it is that it is quicker than arranging sort of valuations on a standard mortgage and getting a mortgage offer issued.
Okay, great. And you just think it's sort of, so for like the benefits of that would just be it's shorter term, you can get it quicker. Yeah. So, and if, for example, the property isn't in a particularly good condition and you need to do substantial works to the property, then that may be something that a standard mortgage lender doesn't necessarily want to lend on, whereas a bridging lender is more familiar with those types of properties, and their criteria is a little bit less strict in terms of what they'll accept. Okay, great. And do you have any tips for people that are looking to buy at auction for their very first time?
Yes. I would say number one is get your finance organised.
Yeah.
So whether you are a cash purchaser or whether you're getting a mortgage, make sure your finance is is agreed effectively, and it's it's all readily available. If you are getting a mortgage, have an offer in principle. Make sure that you're approved for that, and also have a conversation with your mortgage broker or your lender as to how long they need in terms of arranging valuations. What is their lead-in times on surveys being arranged at the moment, and getting offers out, because those are what primarily cause delays in terms of waiting for mortgage offers to arrive.
Okay. And are there any extra costs that are involved in buying or selling a property at auction, do you think?
Not so much with selling. Generally, what a lot of sellers will do is they will pass the costs on to the buyers.
Yeah.
So, for example, say the seller has ordered a search pack, or they've ordered a leasehold information pack. The cost will be passed on to the buyer, and the buyer will have to repay the seller on completion in addition to the purchase price. The other thing to check for in the special conditions is whether there's any contribution towards the seller's legal fees. Some properties I have seen have included a buyer's premium, which can be sort of 1.5-2% plus VAT of the purchase price. And the contribution towards auctioneer's fees. Some auctioneers do have an administration fee as well. That's quite common, that a buyer has to pay the auctioneer administration fee in addition to the deposit as well.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for that. It's very informative. And thanks again for joining us today, Tanya. That's great.
Thank you very much.
And for all you guys at home, if you did enjoy this episode and you found it useful, then please don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we'll see you in the next episode.